Morning, sir.
Yeah, in the last class we started discussing this topic called best practices in architecting cloud applications in the AWS cloud. With respect to AWS cloud, that is Amazon Web Services cloud platform, how we what are the best practices a cloud architect can perform can consider. Okay, this particular topic we have introduced before discussing what are the practices. We discussed about what are the advantages technically for a cloud architect. Another thing is what are the business advantages, business benefits for when we deploy our application in the cloud, especially AWS cloud. What are the benefits? These things we have seen. After that, we have introduced some terminology related to AWS cloud. Let us quickly go through the terminology. I'm not going to repeat the advantages because those are those we have discussed several times. Yeah, this is the terminology which we need to have understanding with respect to AWS. Like AWS is nothing but Amazon Web Services. Amazon EC2 is nothing but Elastic Compute Cloud. Okay, EC2 instances which are auto scalable, elastic in nature, and there is a service called CloudWatch to monitor the services, and RDS relational database service, and MapReduce job flows. Job flow is nothing but sequence of MapReduce jobs we can consider, and simple storage service, call it as Amazon S3. Next, EBS Elastic Block Storage volumes. Next, VPC, Amazon VPC, Virtual Private Cloud, and SQS simple queues. Next, SNS, simple database domains, and these are the terms which are related to AWS. Yeah, so I'm not going to discuss again the same thing. As try to recall that these are the components that we have in AWS cloud. Okay, especially EBS means block storage. Next, simple storage service S3. Next, simple database, of course, relational database service, simple queue service, Elastic MapReduce, and simple notification service, virtual private cloud, and these all things. Yeah. Next, and coming to the topic called best practices. We are having several best practices that we can adopt when we deploy our application in the cloud. Okay, one of those are the first one is design for failure and nothing will fail. This is the first best practice that we can adopt. The flow is like we will be try to get the skeleton so that you will understand properly what is the flow. The thing is like we'll be discussing in general, okay, that is independent of Amazon web server, what are the best practices. Next, this particular best practice, how we can implement, how we can achieve in AWS. This is the flow for every best practice. Like we'll be discussing one best practice where we can use when we deploy our application in the cloud. Okay, and such kind of best practice, how we can perform with respect to AWS. This we will see. Understand? For everything, we will be seeing generalized perspective. What are the advantages? Then how we can achieve with respect to AWS. Okay, like this, we will be mapping every practice to AWS. Okay. Is it fine? Did you get the what you call basic idea about what we are going to discuss? Best practice we will be discussing generally like independent of AWS. Afterwards, we will be seeing how this particular practice can be done with respect to AWS. Got it? Yes?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So now, first practice is design for failure and nothing will fail. In this particular one, we will make use of rule of thumb, that is, will be pessimistic in nature, that our architectures, in architecture, things will fail. Okay, this is what our assumption. Okay, in other words, always design, implement, and deploy for automated recovery from failure. That means we will assume that things will fail, system will fail when we deploy or when we implement this. In several stages, things may fail. That is what our assumption, and we will design our system in such a way that even whenever system failure occurred, how we can able to recover from that failure. Okay, this is what our approach. This is the first best practice that we can consider. In this particular one, we can consider like hardware may failure, or suddenly some strike may happen in application, like power failure, or some kind of clinch may occur. Next, some more than expected number of requests per second, like you consider this CoWIN registration is there, right? In that particular one, I think the day before yesterday it has opened. Then suddenly people rush to register for vaccine slot. Then what happened is, like entire system get stuck because of more number of requests than expected, such kind of state. So if you design a system for such kind of to handle such kind of what you call more requests, then our system will be vulnerable, what you call could able to face such kind of what you call unexpected situation as well. Okay, so we have to design in such a way. See, these are the several instances where we may feel that system may fail, like hardware may failure. Assume that outages will occur. Next, some disaster will strike your application, or assume that you will be slammed with more than the expected number of requests per second someday. Next, see your assume that with the time your application software will fail. Next, so being a pessimist, you end up thinking about recovery strategies during design time, which helps in designing an overall system better. This is what basic approach we should have. Okay, this is the basic practice. So what will happen is, if you realize that things will fail over time and incorporate that thinking into your architecture, and build what you call mechanisms to handle such kind of failures before the failure occurs, then what will happen is, we can able to create fault tolerant architecture for our application in the cloud. Okay. So if you think in this particular way beforehand while designing itself, so that whenever actual failure occurs, our system will be in a position to handle that failure. That means our system will become fault tolerant. Okay. So now we need, in order to build or design a system which is fault tolerant, we need to ask ourselves before designing what these questions, like what happens if a node in your system fails? How do you recognize failure? How do I replace that node? What kind of scenarios do I have to plan for? These are the some of the questions which we need to raise for ourselves while designing a system, so that actual system failure occur means we will be having a mechanism to handle already. Like if there are master and slaves in your architecture, what if the master node fails, and how does failover occur, and how is a new slave instantiated and brought into sync with the master. These are the some of the scenarios we can consider generic way. Okay, now these all are depending on the what call basically related to hardware failures, like node failure, system failure, or master node failure, or slave node failure, or a new slave needs to be created and incorporate what you call work with master, means what has to be done. These all are related to hardware things. Okay, similarly we will be having software failure as well. So there will be some questions need to ask while making system as a fault tolerant with respect to software as well, like what happens to my application if the dependent service changes its interface, in the sense like uh, we are having a software, okay, which is invoking another one API. Let us consider one API is being invoked by our software. Then API, in the sense we can assume as some function calls, isn't it? Some function calls will be having. Let us say for to accomplish one task, there is a function called task, which will take some arguments. So let us say 4 arguments it will take. But due to this interface change, that a task function has been changed to changed in such a way that it is taking 5 arguments instead of 4. Then our system, whatever the application we have developed, that has to be changed accordingly, isn't it? Right? Because this interface has changed, so it has to incorporate that change. Such kind of things we need to question ourselves before while designing it. What if a downstream service times out or returns an exception? What if the cache keys go beyond memory limit? These kind of questions. So now these are the several these are the questions with respect to hardware failure, with respect to software failure. These are the questions we have to raise ourselves in order to design or develop our system fault tolerant. This is the basic article motive for raising these all questions. Okay, so now this is the following strategies can help in event of failure. The strategies are like have a coherent backup and restore strategy for your data and automate it. Build process threads that resume on reboot. Allow the state of the system to resync by reloading messages from queues. These are the basic strategies that we can consider, and these are supporting things like keep pre-configured and pre-optimized virtual images to support strategies 2 and 3 on launch or boot. These are first 3 are basically independent strategies we can consider. These are supporting strategies which will support to accomplish these 3. Okay, some backup we need to maintain, and process threads in order to resume and reboot. Like you can observe in your system as well. Like suppose if you open your browser and some documents, Acrobat Reader, all these things, if you open and due to what you call battery low, your system got shut down. Whenever you put power on, again if you switch on your system, then what will happen? Your system will your operating system will load first. Afterwards, whatever the applications we have opened earlier, those all applications will be opened, right? Isn't it? Did you observe that anytime? Yes. Yeah. So there should be build process threads that resume on reboot. This kind of mechanisms we should we could consider in order to get this particular practice, like design for failure and nothing will fail. So these are the things. Next, and as we have discussed while introducing this topic, we will be discussing generic strategy or generic practice which is best suitable for our application to deploy in the cloud. Now we will be seeing these particular strategies, how we can implement in AWS. With respect to AWS, how we can see here, designing with an assumption that underlying hardware will fail you and will prepare you for the future when it actually fails. Okay, so these are the AWS specific tactics for implementing this best practice. What are those? Is failover gracefully using elastic IPs. We have discussed in the previous class that what is meant by elastic IP. It is a static IP, and that is dynamically remappable. In the sense, we'll be having a static IP, one IP will be having, and that is mapped to one system. Suppose the system fails, then with the same IP, it should be able to map to some other server, okay, in the event of a system failure. That's what we have seen in the previous class. Okay, so by using this elastic IP, we could able to achieve this what you call design for failure and no system failure occur. Next, utilize multiple availability zones. We have discussed about what you call geographical regions, zones, and locations in the previous class. By using those availability zones, those will act as a logical data centers. We could able to make system high availability. You can ensure high availability due to this. Yeah. Next, maintain an Amazon machine image, AMI. We have introduced in the previous class. AMI, Amazon machine image, which is nothing but a bunch of operating system, application software, and some other settings related to configuration settings related to those. We can consider as this bunch what Amazon machine image, AMI. So by using this AMI, we could able to restore and clone environments very easily in different availability zones. Okay, this is the third what you call tactic that we can use with respect to AWS. Next, utilize Amazon CloudWatch. This is to monitor the what you call services which are being provided, right? So various real-time open source monitoring tools. This to get more visibility and take appropriate actions in case of hardware failure. Yeah. So set up an auto scaling group to maintain fixed fleet size so that it replaces Amazon EC2 instances by new ones. Like some instances may be corrupted, those can be replaced with a new one. Okay, for that we will be setting an auto scaling group to maintain this kind of fixed size what you call EC2 instance. Next, utilize Amazon EBS, Elastic Block Storage Service, in order to and set up cron jobs to so that incremental snapshots are automatically updated to S3, Amazon S3, simple storage service, and data are persisted independent of your instances. This is another one. Next, utilize Amazon RDS, Relational Database Service, and set the retention period for backups. These are the strategies that we can use with respect to AWS in order to achieve a best practice, which we call it as design for failure and nothing will fail. This is the best practice. We have discussed what should be our approach, and with respect to hardware failure, what can be questioned or ourselves. Next, with respect to software failures, what should be the questions which we need to consider while designing, and what are the strategies, generic strategies with respect to AWS, how we can implement these strategies. Just these are mentioning what are the services that we will be using in order to achieve these tactics. That's it, these strategies. This is about the first one. The second one is decouple your components. In the sense, like I'll show you the diagram. Here you see there are several codes like controller A, controller B, controller C we are having, and controller A is calling a method in B. Next, controller B is calling a method called C. Now there is straight dependency between A and B, next B and C. That is until what you call controller B is available to use, controller A cannot move forward. Similarly, controller C is available, controller B cannot go forward. This is the strategy when we consider tight coupling. Like in procedural programming languages, whatever we will write, suppose there is small function called small program which consists of printf %d square root of 9. So from main function, main is, let us say main is controller A, and here we are having printf, and controller C is nothing but square root. Now main is being waiting in order to accomplish a printf function. Next, in the printf function, we are having a square root function. Next, after completing this, that will be given to that value will be given to printf. Then that will be executed. That will progress execution of main. So this there is a straight dependency between A and B and B and C. So this is called tight coupling. Instead of that, what we can assume is, let us say here, controller A, controller B, controller C, all are independent. Like whenever it is active, it could able to execute. If it is requiring some task, means it will, that particular message will be kept in queue, okay, corresponding queue. Suppose some task needs to be performed by B, means that will be given to B, and that will be stored in queue B. Next, it will go on considering whatever the request in QA. See, there are several what you call independent queues or individual queues available for each controller, where the tasks need to be performed by corresponding controller are stored. Now, one particular request is being received by controller A from QA, then it will process it. Suppose that there is a dependency, some sort of work has to be done by controller B, means that will be kept in QB and it will proceed with the next message in QA. Understand my point? Suppose QB is having 4 messages, which are 4 tasks needs to be performed by controller B. At present, controller B is not active. Then controller A will not wait for it. Controller A will take another task from QA and will continue executing. Whenever controller B comes into active state, then automatically it will process whatever the messages pending in QB. By taking from QB, it will execute all the tasks one by one. And if controller B requires some task needs to be done by controller C, that will be kept in QC. So independently, these controller A, B, C can execute whenever those controllers are active. This is called loose coupling. Why? Because one particular controller need not wait for another controller to be active. This is what light coupling, independent phases using queues. Due to these queues, whenever we require some task needs to be done by control C, that can be kept in QC irrespective of whether control C is active or not. This is what the advantage of loose coupling. So the second best practice is we will try to make components loose coupled. That means we will try to make components depend on each other loosely, like a very small dependency, we will try to establish among the components. Such kind of components we will try to build. That is the second strategy that we will adopt. See, now we'll see this thing formally, like the cloud reinforces the SOA design principle. This is one of the SOA design principles we have seen in initial classes actually, like loose coupling, tight coupling. The more loosely coupled the components of the system, the bigger and better it scales. Independently, it could able to scale in better. That is the main advantage of having what decoupling. Next, the key is to build components that do not have tight dependencies on each other, so that if one component were to die, sleep, or remain busy for some reason, other components in the system are built so as to continue to work as if no failure is happening. That means loose coupling isolates the various layers and components of your application, so that each component interacts asynchronously with the others and it treats them as a black box. For example, here you can observe there is a web application. Okay, there we are having application server, web server. Okay, and we are having we can separate this application server and web server from the database, so that each server, that is the application server, can independently work, and database server can independently work. This is what the example that we can impose. And here also, while designing, we could question something like which business component or feature could be isolated from current monolithic application and can run standalone separately. What components we can isolate each other, that we can question while designing, while deploying. And then how can I add more instances of that component without breaking my current system, and at the same time serve more users. These are the questions. How much effort will it take to encapsulate that component so that it can interact with other components asynchronously? Asynchronous in the sense of we have seen in this diagram, right? See, is in the tight coupling, whatever we have, like whenever it calls a function in B, it has to wait. Similarly, whenever it calls a function in C, it has to wait. After getting the response from C only, B could progress. After getting the response from B only, A could progress. This is the dependency. Okay, this is synchronous. Whereas asynchronous means irrespective of B's response, A could proceed for the next instruction. Then we can consider asynchronous. So such kind of asynchronous components, asynchronous systems, we should be develop. Okay, so how much effort will it take to encapsulate such kind of component so that it can interact with other components asynchronously? Simply in one word, we can differentiate synchronous and asynchronous in try to understand. This may be useful in other contexts as well. Synchronous means it depends on the time. Okay, time factor is associated with the processing, then we can consider as synchronous. Asynchronous means there is no time. Time factor is not at all considered, then that is asynchronous. So whenever it has something to be done by controller B, that particular request will be kept in the queue. Okay, when it will be processed, all these things is irrelevant for this controller B, controller A, after keeping the message in the queue B. So this is a synchronous component. Got it? Synchronous means depend on time. Asynchronous means there is no time factor exist. So whenever there is a request and then there is a need to communicate with other controller, just it will keep the message. When it will be processed, all these things are irrelevant to this particular one. Okay, this is asynchronous. So now these are the questions that we will frame, and finally, how we can implement this particular best practice in AWS, Amazon Web Services, how we can able to implement this best practice is we will make use of Amazon SQS. We have discussed in the case of components in Amazon Web Services architecture. We have seen simple queue system. I think to isolate components, we will make use of SQS, Amazon SQS, and use Amazon SQS as buffers between components, and design every component such that it exposes a service interface and it is responsible for its own scalability in all appropriate dimensions and interacts with other components asynchronously. These are the tactics that we can use in order to accomplish this particular practice while deploying our application in the Amazon Web Services cloud. Bundle the logical construct of a component into AMI. What is AMI? Amazon Machine Image, so that it can be deployed more often. Okay, bundle logical construct of a component into AMI, so that that AMI can be used to clone the components. Make your application as stateless as possible. That means store session state outside of component by using Amazon SimpleDB. These are the article best tactics we can make use in order to accomplish this second best practice called decouple your components. Basically, the thing is the more loosely coupled components, the more scalable, more flexible your components or your application is. That is what the basic intention behind imposing this best practice. And here in this, we have seen several questions to be asked, and what is the difference between synchronous, asynchronous, and then these queues, how we can make tightly coupled ones as loosely coupled ones by making use of queues, and with respect to AWS cloud, how we can able to do is by making use of Amazon SQS to isolate the components and make each component independent. Okay, this is the second one. Next, coming to the third best practice, implement elasticity. This elasticity term we have used several times in our course of time. Implement elasticity. This is the best practice. In this, cloud brings a new concept of elasticity in your application. That means whenever there is a need, it should be able to scale up the number of servers or scale down the number of servers or the storage or network availability. All these things we could able to increase or decrease depending upon the need. That is what elasticity. So this can be implemented in three different ways. Three ways we can implement elasticity. One is proactive cyclic scaling. That means let us say, let us assume like you consider Facebook. We have Facebook application we have deployed in cloud. Let us say per month 10,000 new users will be registered into Facebook. Then this much, let us say 100 GB of data will be generated by those people. Okay, entirely with including existing users and new users data. 100 GB of new data will be generated every month. This is just assumption. Okay, then what kind of scalability we can expect in terms of storage is, after every month the storage, suppose in current month we are having 500 GB of storage for Facebook application in the cloud. For the next month, what it has to, how it has to increase, or the elasticity should be done in such a way that the storage should be 600 GB by next month. By next month, by next to next month, it should be 700 GB. Like that, periodically the scale up or storage increase has to happen. Understand my point? That is the first type of elasticity. Proactive cyclic scaling, in the sense of periodic scaling that occurs at a fixed interval, daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly. Right? Like this, we will be updating or we will be performing scaling periodically. That is proactive cyclic scaling. Next, second type of elasticity is a proactive event-based scaling. In the sense, suppose let us say in the Facebook itself, whenever we introduce new application, new add-on, if you impose like we can dislike or whatever the like we have done, that we can revert back, such kind of new features added, then there is more possibility that more users will be attracted. Like you consider WhatsApp, whenever there is a new feature like adding stickers or deleting whatever the message we have put, these kind of new features if we add, or replying to the particular message, particular image, these kind of new features added means there is more chance that there is a chance to get more traffic at that particular time. So when depending upon events, we could increase the storage, we could increase the bandwidth, we could increase the compute capacity. This is what elasticity. Understand? So this is the second type of elasticity. Here we will be scaling with respect to event. So whenever there is like a new product launch or marketing campaigns, this kind of business event occurs means there is a chance of huge traffic. Then accordingly we will be scaling. This is a second type of elasticity called proactive event-based scaling. Third one is auto scaling based on demand. That is, by using a monitoring service, your system can trigger to take appropriate actions so that it scales up or down based on metrics. Like how we are utilizing the servers, based upon that we could able to scale up or down our storage capacity or network bandwidth or vertical compute capacity, all these things. This is the third type of elasticity. One is proactive cyclic scaling, that is periodically we will be doing this. Proactive event-based scaling, depending upon the events, we will be guessing, oh, this particular event may raise our traffic to this much extent, or may make down our traffic to this much extent. Like that, we can proactively think depending upon the event, and we can extend, we can scale up and down as well. Next, the third one is auto scaling based on demand. By using monitoring service, we could able to take necessary step to scale up or down based on the metrics. These are the three types of elasticity. Yeah, is it clear?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Next, to implement elasticity, one has to first automate the deployment process and streamline the configuration and build process. To implement this elasticity, any kind of elasticity, one has to automate the deployment process. Why? Because suppose a scale up operation is being done. That means instead of having 7 servers, we wanted to have 9 servers. That means deployment process needs to be automated, so that additional 2 servers will also be deployed automatically. That is what we have to do in order to implement elasticity. So in this particular one, how we can automate our deployment processes? First, automate your infrastructure. Here, it is recommended that you take the time to create an automated deployment process early on during the migration process. We will be creating automated deployment process while migrating itself. So to automate a deployment process, what has to be done is create a library of recipes. That is nothing but some scripts will be developing for installing some servers or some application softwares or some configuration settings. We will be writing some scripts. So whenever we wanted to increase server instance, 7 server instances we are having, one more instance we wanted to deploy, means what we will do, just we will run all the scripts on another another server, so that same environment we could able to set. This is what the first thing that we have to automate this deployment process. We have to create a library of these scripts, we can say. Next, manage the configuration and deployment process using agents bundled inside an AMI. We have seen what is meant by AMI. Amazon Machine Image, where we'll be having combination of all operating system, application software, and configuration settings and all. So we will be grouping agents which are used to manage configuration and deployment process inside AMI, and bootstrap your instances. Bootstrap your instances, will be saying what is meant by bootstrapping. Okay, these are the 3 steps that we will be using in order to automate the deployment process. There is a flow you try to follow here. Third best practice is implement elasticity. In this, what are the types of elasticity that we have seen. Next, in order to implement this elasticity, we need to automate the deployment process. In this, we need to automate infrastructure. That means how we can automate deployment process by making use of these 3 steps. And this bootstrap instances, here we will be giving the type of instance, like let us say 9 instances of servers we are having. Okay, one will act as a web server, another one will act as a database server, another one will act as some storage or some other thing. Okay, for some other purpose. So all these instances will be having some common vertical functionalities, but in addition to that, that particular functionality it could able to provide if we give some argument while deploying it. This is what we will do. So here instances ask you a question at boot, that who am I and what is my role. This kind of question will be asked. Every instance should have a role, like a database server, application server, slave server. In the case of web application, we'll be having these kind of roles to play in the environment. So this kind of role, if you give, accordingly that particular functionality will be provided by that instance. So that role we have to provide while booting itself. That is nothing but bootstrap. While booting an instance, while loading an instance itself, we should provide what kind of role that instance should act, like database server, or application server, or slave server. This kind of things we should provide. Okay, in this particular one, what are the benefits is like recreates the environment with a few clicks and a minimal effort, and more control over your abstract cloud-based resources, reduces human-induced deployment errors. Why? Because we automated the process. Just if you give the role, automatically it will configure the settings accordingly. Next, it creates a self-healing and a self-discoverable environment, which is more resilient to hardware failure. These are the benefits of bootstrapping your instances. And this is the approach, like implement elasticity is the best practice. For this, we will automate the deployment process. For this, we will make use of bootstrapping instances. Okay, this is the thing. Next, with respect to AWS, how we can automate your infrastructure is define auto scaling groups for different clusters using auto scaling feature. If you remember, in AWS components, we have seen auto scaling feature, right? In a EC2 auto scaling feature that we will make use in order to automate the deployment process. Next, monitor your system metrics using Amazon CloudWatch. This is a component which is available in AWS. By using this particular feature, this particular service, we will monitor system metrics. So, and take appropriate actions or send a notification. This can be done whenever we perform monitoring, and we can make use, we can give appropriate actions accordingly. Next, store and retrieve machine in configuration information dynamically. For this, we will make use of Amazon Simple Database service. Next, design a build process such that it dumps the latest builds into a bucket in Amazon S3. We have seen what is the, this is one of the components of AWS architecture, Amazon S3 Simple Storage Service. Okay, design a build process such that it dumps the latest builds into a bucket in Amazon S3. Next, invest in building resource management tools. Like these are the some of the open source configuration management tools available. By using these tools, we could build resource management tools. Next, bundle just enough operating systems and your system dependencies into AMI. Okay, in AMI will be having some some components like operating system, this application software and some settings, right? Those things we will bundle together by using AMI. Next, reduce bundling and launch time. Okay, this bundling time we will be reducing by booting from EBS, Elastic Block Storage volumes. Whatever the EBS volumes we have already in AWS, from those if you use AMI, automatically we no need to spend much time in booting. This is another. This is another step in it. Next, application component should not assume health or location of hardware it is running on. For example, dynamically attach the IP address of a new node to the cluster. Okay. Next, in addition to these, we are having two more practices. Think parallel. Another one is keep dynamic data closer to the compute and static data closer to the end user. Regarding this, I'll record the video and upload by tomorrow or day after tomorrow. Just a 20 minutes video. I'll record it and upload. Anyway, we have missed this week Monday class, so that you can watch